Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Is Law School Right for You? This is meant for a broad community, current students at Tufts, graduates, maybe you're in one of the professional schools. I hope that you find this information pertinent and we'll get through a 1-hour program. I would love to encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the chat. And I'm being assisted by Matt Casey today, Associate Director of Career Services, and he will be helping me with the chat. And I will also try to leave some time at the end of the presentation for you to ask questions for me. So is law school right for you? Let's get going. Okay. So first, I just want to let you know who I am. My name is Dovie King, and I'm the Pre-Law Advisor at Tufts. For those of you who have not met me, this is a little picture that will pop up when you sign into Handshake to choose an appointment with me. I like you all to know how you can reach me. So you have my email there. The Career Center is located at Dowling Hall on the 7th floor. But I imagine that most of you would like to meet with me one-on-one and have a conversation about your interest in law school. So the best way to do that is to go into Handshake and choose an appointment slot that works best for you. So that's me. So I imagine most of you are here today because you have a lot of questions in making your decision about whether law school is right for you or not. And they could be spinning all around and can be overwhelming at times because it is a big decision and a big step towards your future. So in meeting with you, some of the common questions that I hear are, for example, is it even worth it to go to law school? And by that, the question is, it's so expensive. What am I getting myself into? So I will try to address some of those concerns today. How will I afford it? There's close to 200 accredited law schools in the US. So how do I pick one out of those 200 schools? And there's numerous others that are not accredited by the ABA. LSAT is always at the top of the list in terms of the questions I get. And then also, should I take a gap year or two between college and law school? So these are all very typical questions, and these may be some of your questions. I encourage you to share your questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer those during the program or a little bit later on. So this is totally normal for you to have these questions. Again, it's a really big decision, and so you want to be very informed. And so let's move on. The first thing that I would want you to just ask yourself is, why do I want to be a lawyer? And there's no right or wrong answer to this question, and it's very personal to you. People come from very different backgrounds and value systems and cultures and ages and things of that nature. So the reasons can vary, and I can help have a conversation with you to help draw out those things. But what I thought I would do is just put together a chart of some of the pros and cons of being a lawyer and starting from there. So here's some of the pros. You might, I'm trying to keep things real here, right? Because the number one thing I hear is money. It's just the earning potential is quite high as an attorney. So that's always a draw. Some people want to be a lawyer because of the respect and the power and the prestige. Other people are in it because you want to help people. And you want to be part of a professional network that includes judges and lawyers and academics and people doing really interesting, important work around the globe. And you would be part of that community and that network as a future attorney. And some of you are just really interested in the intellectual challenge, the rigors of the law. And, as a lawyer myself, I'm always impressed when I have a colleague who loves being an attorney just because of that mental challenge. So whatever the reasons might be for you, again, there's no right or wrong answer. Some other things that I hear students say is that you want to make a difference or you want to change the law. And a law degree can really put you in a position to do that. Maybe you want to be a judge someday as your goal, or you want to work at a law firm. These are all reasons that are quite normal, why people want to go to law school. Let's look at some of the cons, though. So cons of being a lawyer: high stress. I think probably 99% of lawyers would cite that as the first drawback. It can be a very stressful profession and job, so that's one. We've all heard negative stereotypes about lawyers, and especially on TV and in the news these days, we hear about, high-profile lawyers who are getting disbarred from practicing law. And so you see all the negative stuff that comes, the perception of it that comes through the media. Long work hours, it is very common. It's part of the culture as an attorney to want to work or be expected to work long hours. So that's something that might not be attractive to you. Of course, the financial cost of law school and having student loans after is, I would put that probably in the top 3 of complaints that lawyers would have, is just how long it takes to pay off your student loans from law school. You can work with really difficult clients, and that could be, add to the stress. And you may not know, in terms of substance use, that the legal profession, unfortunately, is a profession that has high rates of substance use. I think about a quarter of attorneys report having some sort of difficulty with either alcohol or other drugs. And, again, part of it is part of the culture. As a future attorney, at receptions, at dinners, alcohol is always part of it. So it's just something to be mindful of, and something you may not want to relate to or be a part of. And then finally, the geographic constraints. That's a pretty important one to consider, because when you do decide to become an attorney, you're going to need to take the bar exam to get licensed. And those exams are administered state by state. So your big decision graduating from law school is, where do I want to practice law? If you choose a place like California, for example, then you're authorized to practice law only in California. If you want to move somewhere else, like New York or Texas, you might have to take another bar exam. So with the bar exam comes additional expenses and studying, et cetera. So these are all kind of the main cons that I thought of. Maybe you have other ones that you want to share in the chat. So then I think that in making your decision about whether or not to go to law school or be a lawyer, that doing a self-assessment is a great first step. There are some things that you could probably learn about yourself through a self-assessment. And these are tools, a lot of them are available at the Career Center website. I checked, and some of the self-assessments, which are questions that you're asked, and depending on what your responses are, you get a little bit more information about what might be a good fit for you. But some of the important things to consider with your career goals in general is your family and culture, what where you come from. Are there any cultural considerations in terms of the work that you do? What your personal interests are and your values. Like, for example, one thing that I've learned about myself is that I'm not someone who's very corporate oriented, not drawn to big business or, having big multi-million-dollar clients. That's not the draw for me in practicing law. So that's a value in a sense. And knowing that about myself gives me the opportunity to place myself in a work situation that's more conducive to what matters to me and where I'll have more satisfaction. So, other assessments that are available to assess your skills, career competencies. If you go to any law school websites, they do have self-assessments available there. So you could go, let's say, Yale Law School. They have a self-assessment for law school, and you can check that out. And you can also do, various personality tests free online. And hopefully those tools will give you a stronger basis in terms of making your decision. Okay, moving on. One thing I want you to know is that, you may decide that going to law school and going for the JD is not for you for whatever reason. But one thing you should ask yourself, is there an alternative, to getting a JD, which is a Juris Doctor degree? Because you can very well work within the legal profession and do really interesting and challenging work without necessarily going to law school and incurring, the expense and the time that's required. And these are just some ideas of career paths that would put you within a legal setting that wouldn't require a JD at all. And I put law school and higher ed up there because there are lots of interesting jobs, working within a law school or higher education. You can work at the admissions office. You can work with student organizations. You can help run clinics. You could work as a paralegal at a law firm. And paralegals oftentimes get to do really interesting work that is similar to what attorneys do in terms of filling out forms, maybe helping out with clients, going to file something at the court. So that's another way to get into a law firm and do substantive work without, having to spend 3 years of your life in law school. A couple that I want to highlight off of this list is, working in as a court interpreter. The court system have wonderful jobs for recent graduates. For example, working at the clerk's office. This is where all the filings get made. You could work inside the courtroom with the judge in different capacities. And if you worked at a nonprofit organization, for example, you could do work as a client advocate where people are walking in with legal problems and you sit down and interview them and you assess their issues and you work with an attorney to try to resolve them. And you could even, in some cases, represent those clients in administrative hearings. So this is just food for thought, something that you should consider because you could very well have a rewarding career that doesn't require going to law school. But let's move on, assuming that you do want to go to law school or you want to have all the information available. What are the requirements to be a lawyer? So this is a really good question, and I'm going to cover this by touching on 6 topics. So these are the top 6 things that I identified as you needing to do in order to be an attorney. So we're going to talk about the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test, law school itself, the bar exam, which I mentioned earlier. There's this thing called moral character. Sometimes it's also referred to character and fitness test. It sounds kind of vague, right? I'll go through that and explain it to you. Then the oath of office, and finally the law license. So I'm going to touch on these individually. I'll probably spend the most amount of time in the law school category because that's probably where a lot of your questions are. But I think it's really important for you to have the big picture of what it takes to be a lawyer because it doesn't end with your decision to go to law school. There's quite a few steps that come after it. And if you have any questions or you have thoughts as I'm speaking, please feel free to put them in the chat, and let me just check now if there's anything in there. And then I don't see anything now, but yeah, take advantage of that. Okay, so let's talk about the LSAT. This is the first step. The LSAT is that treacherous exam that everyone, stresses about, and is supposed to give law schools an idea of the likelihood that you will do well in law school. So the reason that there is this LSAT requirement is because there's this organization called the American Bar Association that you may have heard of before. And it's a national bar association basically for attorneys. But one of its important tasks is to accredit law schools and also to create rules regarding admissions to law school, the education that you have in law school. So last time I checked, as of December of last year, there's 196 ABA accredited law schools. So all of these law schools will follow these uniform rules. And one of them is that they're required to use an admissions test. And since the late 1960s, that test has been the LSAT. So that's where that comes from. Law schools are required to use it currently. In the last couple of years, the ABA has allowed law schools to also accept the GRE. And just looking at admissions for last year, 98% of applicants chose to take the LSAT regardless. So even the GRE was available. And finally, just one thing that you should know going forward is that the ABA recently decided that it will no longer require law schools to use the LSAT. That will go into effect fall of 2025. And that doesn't mean that the LSAT is going away anytime soon. It just means that it won't be this uniform requirement for all 196 schools. Instead, schools will make the individual choice of whether they're going to use that or a different test in terms of its admissions process. So that could be pretty good news for those of you who are just starting out in college and going forward. It's possible that you may not even have to bother taking the LSAT, but there you go. Okay, I'm having a little trouble with my clicker here. Here we go. Okay, so just so we break down the LSAT really quickly, I get a lot of questions about it. It's a 3.5 hour test. You get little breaks between each section. So with all that added in, it's about 3.5 hours. And essentially multiple choice questions that will test your reading comprehension, your ability to do reasoning and to do logic questions. And there's a written essay portion. So the future test dates have already been put out through June, and it's typically a couple of test dates in February, April, and June. The fee is $215. You do need to register to take it well in advance. I believe it's about a month in advance of the test date is the deadline to register. Aside from this $250 fee to take the test, most people do a review course to help them get the best score possible on the LSAT. And the cost of that course can vary. Back in the old days when I was going to law school, there were these really expensive in-person classes offered by big name companies like the Princeton Review, et cetera. But nowadays you have at your disposal a broad array of options. And if you go to the website called the Law School Admissions Committee's website, there are free options for courses. There's really reasonable, like less than $100 for a more in-depth course that gives you access to practice tests, to outlines, things of that nature. But you can get a lot of the stuff free directly from the organization that administers the LSAT. So I would definitely start there. And you could always come to see me and we could discuss your options, and really what kind of a test taker you are and what kind of class you'll do well in. So trying to match you up with something like that. So your LSAT score, you needed to apply to law school. So let's go on to the next category, which is law school. So as I mentioned, there's 196 schools. Typically, for most people, you earn your law degree in 3 years. The ABA has permitted part-time programs. So a number of law schools offer evening programs, for example, where you would earn your JD in 4 years. And typically people want that option because they're working professionals or they have families and a day job, and they kind of want to balance all of those things and do it part-time. Another thing you should know is that the ABA has also permitted a handful of schools to do distance learning, or in other words, online degree programs. So let's see, how many did I see? I think I saw something like 13 schools currently that offer online JDs. And these are from accredited, programs, good schools. So those are some options to think about, whether you to go the traditional route and go, in person to that school, do it online, or maybe do it on a part-time basis. I thought it would be helpful for you to know where most of the law schools are located. If you just see a map of the US and where they're spread out, by far the highest density of law schools are in California, New York, Texas, Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and DC. There's no surprise there. One second. Yeah, and coincidentally, these are going to be some of the most competitive places to get into, just because more people want to live in these states as opposed to all the other ones in between. So there's just something to be aware of. Okay.
Dovie,
Yes.
there was a question from our attendees. How long should you plan to take the LSAT before applying to law school?
So that's a very good question. And it's going to be a very individual question depending on you and what your plan is, what year you are, or whether you're going to graduate and work for a while before you apply to law school. But generally, you need your LSAT score in time, to make it for the application deadline. Your application won't be considered without it. So you have to plan in advance. Okay, it takes about at least a month, 4 to 6 weeks to get your LSAT score. So you kind of have to work backwards. If your application deadline, let's just say it's September 1st, then you need to have your LSAT score by that date. So you go online and you check the LSAT dates when they're offered, and factoring in that you need to give yourself at least 4 to 6 weeks to get your result. And that's one way to do it. Some people also factor in possibly taking the test a second time, or wanting to have that option just in case. So, we do have some resources on the pre-law page at the Career Center's website. But there's no like cookie cutter answer in terms of what would work for you. I would really want to sit down with you, get a sense of what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, what your timeline is for law school, and we can work from that. I can help you develop a timeline. But generally, that's how you'd want to approach the question. Is you want to know when the LSAT is offered, and factor in all those weeks between studying, taking it, and getting your result. So thank you for that question. And if there's any others, Matt, just feel free to jump in. But this is a fun thing that I just wanted to mention, a bit of history is, I'm a history buff, and, I love Hamilton, the musical, and that's even got me more interested. But to be a lawyer didn't always require going to college, going to law school, taking exams, things of that nature. When our country was founded, lawyers were pretty much self-taught. They worked as apprentices and were mentored by someone who had training or was a lawyer. And by getting training from that individual, learning the ropes, that's how you became a lawyer. So, the vast majority of people who signed the Declaration of Independence and also were delegates to the first Constitutional Convention were lawyers or had some training. But keep in mind that, there weren't great universities built all over the colonial America. They were pretty much learning from a friend and a mentor. The first law school technically was established in 1744, but that was really someone inviting a pupil into his home to teach him one-on-one, and then more pupils wanted to come in and learn. So it was really informal, and it's that apprenticeship model, and I thought that was really interesting to share with you. But I also wanted to ask you, I have a very favorite person who's a lawyer without ever going to college, without ever going to law school, completely self-taught. Any ideas on who that might be? It's like a prominent person in our history, a self-taught lawyer.
Dovie, we have one more question around LSAT test dates, and wondered if you knew that they were, if any are offered after the month of June and in August, for example.
Yes, it is. It is offered in August. Okay, so I'll just move on. This is my favorite lawyer who received no college, no law school, completely self-taught, read lots of legal cases on his own, and then developed a partnership with another attorney and became a successful trial lawyer before going into elected office. So clearly this is Abraham Lincoln. And I just think that's food for thought. The profession has really come a long way. It's highly regulated now, but that wasn't always the case. And I think that's just an interesting thing to note. So, and how do we pick a law school? This is one of the most frequently asked questions that I get. There's so many places to choose from. And, I'm just going to get right into it because this is what almost all students have on their minds. I actually hadn't heard this term T14 until I heard it repeatedly in meetings with students. But you care about rankings, I take it, because it's one of the most important questions I get asked. And, we all know about the US News and World Report's rankings. Since around 1990, they've been ranking law schools consistently. So it's been about 40 years. And there's the group, the top 14 law schools on this list have consistently made the top 14 this entire time. So they may move around in terms of what slot they get. Maybe they're number 3 this year, and last year they were number 2. But these 14 schools pretty much rank as the top law schools consistently year after year. So sometimes the student tells me, well, I just want to apply to the T14 schools, meaning the top, schools, very well-known schools. And that's what this refers to. And, I think that rankings can have a place in giving you information. And it's not only how they're ranked, there's other information that you can get on there, about student demographics, the courses that are offered, that sort of thing. But I would strongly recommend against using this as your main indication or your main motivation for picking a law school, because it doesn't encapsulate a number of things. So here, I wanted to show you, if we look at the top 10 most expensive law schools to go to, no surprises, T14 schools, right? So, it is going to be the costliest alternative for you in terms of going to law school, and that shouldn't necessarily be a deterrent. But there is a reason why these are expensive schools. One of the things that the US News and World Report looks at is expenses per student. And these schools charge a lot of money, and on paper, they're going to come out as spending the most dollars or investing the most dollars per student. And in order to keep those ratios high, rates keep going higher and higher. Recently, at the end of last year, a number of law school deans decided to come together and to say that they're no longer going to participate in the ranking system. And this was started by the dean at Berkeley Law School in California, and has been followed suit by all the top law schools, even the T14 law schools. And the reason cited for that is because there are factors that aren't considered and places schools at a disadvantage. For example, it says nothing about public interest programs and commitments by each law school. Those aren't part of the rankings. And then there's really affordable law schools where you could go and really be able to pay them off, maybe even without taking loans, but because those schools keep their fees low and their tuition low, they rank consistently low on the US News and World Report. So they get disadvantaged, even though they may be providing a quality education at a lesser cost. And then finally, there's diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations and what law school rankings tell you, and what they don't measure in terms of diversity. And some of these schools have the least amount of diversity, and that could be an important consideration to you. I know it was for me as a person of color going into law school. I wanted to make sure that I was going to a place that welcomed and had a lot of visibility for students of color. So I just wanted to see how the expense ties into those rankings. By the way, the ABA, that National Bar Association I told you about, they don't participate in rankings at all. So just keep in mind that these rankings are made by, private company, like with their own, business model and their own agenda. And a quarter of it is based on reputation alone, which that's not really a tangible thing, right, in terms of ranking schools. The other thing I thought it would be helpful for you to know is that regardless of where you go to law school, your first year of classes is going to be the same. Essentially, these are the courses that you're going to take in law school your first year at any ABA accredited school. These are considered the core courses. Civil procedure, it's how you file a case in court, make it through the court system. Contracts, torts, is also, you could think of it as personal injury law, property, like real property law, criminal law, and constitutional law, which was my favorite. And then, of course, legal research and writing, which is a very specific way of writing and analyzing laws. So keep in mind that that first year is going to look pretty much like this, and it's in your upper, second and third year. Now you can start taking electives, and where it's going to matter what school you go to, because you want to know that they have electives or courses on issues that are important to you, if you know what that is. So there's that. Other factors that I would strongly suggest that you look at in choosing a law school is location is really important, where you feel you would be happy, where you'd feel comfortable. A lot of Tufts students will tell me that they want to go to DC, New York, Boston, or maybe the West Coast, like LA, San Francisco. So those are big urban centers. You may not be in that category. There's a lot of selection in between both coasts, but that's typically an important one. The cost of living is, you should know about that, because the tuition alone isn't what you're going to invest in your law school education. You're going to be paying for food, for your shelter, and other miscellaneous costs. Check out not only what tuition is at the law school, but also what kind of financial aid they offer. Sometimes this could be in the form of scholarships, or it could also be at the tail end, as you're graduating, there are loan repayment assistance programs. For example, if you go into public interest law, let's say you go into a legal aid society, your law school may cancel your loans X amount every year until it's gone. Based on that work that you're doing, that helps the community. So look into those sorts of things, because those could be very helpful in terms of you financing your legal education. If I were in your shoes, I would also look at bar passage rates. All of this information, by the way, is available at each law school website. It's required to be posted, so you can typically find it without much difficulty. But you can check the bar passage rates of their graduating class. That tells you a lot. If it's a pretty high rate, you know that the education you're getting there is really going to help you to have the tools to pass that test, and vice versa. Employment info is really important as well. Let's say you want to go to school like Boston College. You could check to see where their graduates have found work, and it'll break it down by law firm, or were they judicial law clerks, or did they work for government or for an NGO? And it gives you salary info too. And I think that's really helpful. You may be someone who only wants to work at a big law firm. Well, why not check the employment statistics of the law school and see if a good proportion of the students are able to get jobs in law firms? Because I think that's a strong indication that might be a good place for you. Of course, there's no one of these categories by itself is going to give you all the information. But looking at the demographics of the entering class, like what is the average LSAT GPA? That's also going to help you determine whether you're competitive or not for getting into that school. Again, it's not a bright line. There's obviously people below the average, above, who get in. But I think that's helpful to keep things realistic in terms of your chances of getting in. And for those of you who are interested in doing social justice work or public interest work, I would check into the law school's commitment to that in the form of, professors. Do they have legal clinics that you can take focusing on skills in that area? Do they offer grants for summer funding? So you'll have 2 summers in law school where you're doing legal internships. Those are at your expense unless you can get paid for it or get funding. So if that law school offers guaranteed funding, then that's a really great perk for you to be able to pursue that kind of work. So there are other factors as well, of course, but these are just some that you should think about when you're choosing the right law school for you. And finally, in terms of law school, networking is really important, because you're going to get really great information by talking to people who have been in law school, who are lawyers, or work at law schools. And there's this great organization called the Tufts Lawyers Association that each one of you should be a member of as students and graduates. They have a LinkedIn page that you can just join. They also have a website, and they're on all the, Twitter and Instagram and all that. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to be connected. They do have a list of their members, so you could check it out and see if someone graduated from the law school you're interested in. You could reach out to them, or I can help make an introduction. And you say, hey, I'm considering University of Pennsylvania. I see that you graduated from there. Do you have a few minutes to talk to me about the admissions process? That's a great way to use that resource. And just for those of you who have your calendars out, I want you to save the date for March 30th. March 30th. It might be the 31st. Okay, it's the end of March. It'll be in my pre-law newsletter. The Tufts Lawyers Association is hosting its first in-person reception and program on campus, and it's meant for all of you students to come and be mentored and have an opportunity to learn about the law, to talk to lawyers one-on-one. This is a wonderful opportunity for you asked them about getting internships, about getting into law school, what their experiences were like. So I really, really hope to see you there. It's going to be catered with nice food and, beverages, and nice people coming in from different parts of the country. So mark your calendar for March 30th, but I will give you the exact date in the pre-law newsletter shortly. These are some other places where you can network. Hopefully you know about Jumbos for Jumbos, which is another place to get matched with, a graduate to help you. There are professors and great advisors at Tufts who either teach legal courses or are themselves lawyers. They're great people to speak with. I know that the political science department has professors who are very involved and invested in helping you to get into law school. If you're able to get an internship or a job that's in the legal world, that is also a great place to ask questions. So these are all just different ideas for you to get those bits of information that will really kind of be the glue in all this research that you're doing about law schools. And finally, some of you have friends or family members who are lawyers or judges. They're a great resource too. To talk to and get information and get their feedback, what it was like for them. Okay, so that's all that I wanted to say about law school at the moment. I just want to move on to the bar exam quickly, and the rest is going to go pretty quickly. You should know that once you graduate from law school, you're not yet an attorney. In fact, when you graduate, it's going to be very bittersweet because coming that summer is the bar exam, and you're going to be studying for it essentially all summer. It's just something, it's a rite of passage that is part of the process that everyone needs to go through, and you'll have to pick the jurisdiction or the state where you want to sit for the exam. So if your goal is to practice law in Massachusetts, then you'll register for it here. And then again, you'll be licensed only to practice law in the state of Massachusetts unless you take some additional steps. The other thing to keep in mind is that the bar exam, it's typically a 2-day exam, multiple choice questions and essays, and it can be very costly depending on the state. It can be up to like $1,500 just to take the exam. It's only offered twice a year. So for people who don't pass the first time around, there's only like one other chance to take it that same year, or maybe you have to wait till the next year. So it can be costly. And one thing you should know is that it's not atypical for a law school graduate to take an additional loan out. It's called a bar study loan, just so that you have money that summer to be able to live somewhere, to pay for your bar course, to pay for the fees. And I checked recently, and that loan is a maximum of $15,000. So that's an additional loan that a lot of students or graduates will take out to help them get through that next big step. So what happens if you graduated from law school, you passed the bar exam, are you then a lawyer? Of course not. Who are all these people? These are some of my favorite people. We have FDR and JFK Jr., Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Michelle Obama. And I'm putting them on here for a reason. Like, what do these people share in common? Any ideas? Well, these high-profile, very successful people and leaders in our country failed the bar exam on their first try. In fact, for JFK Jr., I think it took him 3 times before he passed the New York bar exam. Hillary Clinton, she failed the DC bar, but then she was able to pass the Arkansas bar exam. And Michelle Obama failed the Illinois bar the first time around, and Kamala Harris failed the California bar. FDR failed the New York bar. So this is a lot of random information that I know, but it's important to put out there because you may not pass the bar the first time, and it's okay. You can still be a lawyer. It's just an exam, and it needn't get in the way of your entire future. And people typically pass it the second or the third time, and you can still be highly successful. So that does not determine your entire future. So Just a little footnote there. Okay, so you're not in the clear yet to be a lawyer. There's this thing called moral character that you have to demonstrate that you're fit to practice law, that you have good moral character. So there's going to be an inquiry into conduct or behavior that impairs an applicant's ability to practice law in a competent, ethical, and professional manner. And this, again, will vary state by state. How does this work? Well, okay, so you are going to be sent a questionnaire as part of getting, your bar license, and it's going to ask you in depth all kinds of questions, and you have to disclose all kinds of personal, private information. These are some of the things that you'll get asked about on that questionnaire that you have to report honestly about. And again, it's going to vary state by state, but it's going to ask about past criminal conduct and financial things. Are you on top of your bills? Have you filed for bankruptcy? And these don't necessarily disqualify you. There's an opportunity to explain. But these would be like red flags. And the reason that they ask, because it could keep you from becoming an attorney. And you're going to notice as you start applying to law schools that they have a section, a character and fitness section, where they're going to ask you some of these questions like, have you ever been placed on academic probation, or have you been expelled from a school? Have you cheated on an exam and gotten punished? Those kinds of infractions that involve dishonesty and deceit are really big ones in terms of impeding your ability to be an attorney. Traffic records, if you can believe it. When I was applying for the Massachusetts bar, I'd gotten a speeding ticket in my life, like 10 years ago. I had to dig that up in order to report it as part of this character and fitness. So the main thing here is just being honest and disclosing things. In some complicated situations, you may want to speak to a lawyer so that you get this right. And by the way, if you plan on working for government, they typically have you go through extensive background checks that will be similar in nature to this. So this next slide may come out of left field for some of you, but it's based on a real situation. Should a white supremacist be allowed to practice law? In other words, is someone who is devoted to, anti-Semitism and a racist agenda, is that person fit to practice law under these moral character analysis? And I bring up this case because when I was graduate from law school, someone around that same time was applying to get licensed in Illinois. He's like a well-known white supremacist, and he disclosed on his character and fitness application that, yeah, he wanted to be a lawyer so that he can, push this agenda of white supremacy, anti-Semitism, etc. And his case got appealed and appealed and appealed because he was denied at every step. And it finally went up to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals for the Illinois region, a federal appeals court. And they basically said, yeah, the buck stops here. You were denied the license, and we're not going to step in and change that. So he was denied a bar license. And I bring this up now because this was about 25 years ago. It'll be interesting. We live in such a different political climate these days with so many divisions. It would be interesting how this would be handled nowadays. But just to say, this is the extent, this is the level of, the issues that come up for character and fitness. So yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting note. The next step to being a lawyer is taking the oath of office. The oath will vary state by state, and it's going to be administered by a judge, typically a state court judge. But you have to be comfortable with this oath, with saying that you're going to support the Constitution of the United States and the state that you're practicing in, that you will faithfully discharge the duties of an attorney, and you're going to conduct yourself with integrity and civility. So know ahead of time that this is what you're going to test and that you're fine with it. And then once you go through all these steps and you actually take the oath, you know, you raise your right hand and the judge is there and you repeat after me, that whole thing. Then the next step is your law license. You are now a licensed attorney. And so now your job is to maintain that license in good standing. You can also now apply to get admitted to the federal courts, because that oath you just took is to be admitted to that state, all the state courts. You're going to have to pay annual bar dues, and those can vary like $200–300 or more per year. Some states have continuing legal education requirements where you have to continue taking seminars and things to just stay on top of the law. And it's up to you to maintain your good standing so that you don't get disbarred from the practice of law, which we have seen in the news that some prominent people are getting disbarred for doing really sketchy things in the political realm. So as I'm concluding the program, I just want to end with this note, looking ahead to the future. What does the future of law school look like, or of the legal profession? So I got some stats that I thought would be interesting. So if we're looking at the most current entering class of law school, like that just entered this last fall, these are kind of some information that I think points to where we're going in terms of achieving diversity. It's for the past 2-3 years, the diversity of the entry law student class has broken records, and it did so again this year, the most diverse class ever. 39% identify as students of color, 55% are women, 14% identify as LGBTQ, and then 0.6% as transgender. So these are categories that students voluntarily or applicants report on. And so I think this in some ways is a good sign of, you know, where the legal profession, you know, has come from being a not very diverse profession to one that's moving more in that direction. Just keep in mind that there is a big case that may go up before the Supreme Court, which challenges admissions policies that take diversity into consideration. So we'll have to wait and see if the court does hear that case, and that may have an impact on this. Finally, I thought you might want to have some information about Tufts graduates. And so in the last year, this is the most recent data that we have. So again, this is the class of 2022. They just started this past fall. We had 101 Tufts graduates apply. 18 were college seniors, but as you can see, the vast majority applying to law school have taken between 1 and 3 or more years off. About on average, 86% of them were admitted into a law school. And when you compare that with the national rate, which is about 68%, Tufts is well above that. Some of the schools that people were admitted to, kind of some of the T14 schools, but other ones as well, NYU, USC, UCLA, Berkeley, Columbia, etc. This is just a small sliver of the schools that they have gone to. And just to let you know that these statistics for the past 4 years actually have been posted online at the Career Center's website, and they're available for you to look at. You'll find that last year we had 148 people apply to law school. So there's been a drop, and that was a very unusual year during COVID, where applications were very, very high across the board in the US. But these are the statistics. I'm happy to discuss this more with you individually if you have any questions. And with that, I will conclude my program. So thank you very much. We do have a couple minutes. Matt, if there is any questions or things posted in the chat, I'm happy to address those now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dovie. I think one question that came in is that do bar exams vary in content state to state? And do you feel like it's easier to get a license in certain states over others?
Oh, that is such a good question. So yes and yes. There are some bar exams that have lower pass rates. You're gonna have to do a little bit of research, but the ones that are typically regarded as the most difficult, meaning that their bar passage rates aren't as high, like California is one of them, New York is one of them. So people can shop around, you know, and make very wise decisions as to where they want to take the bar that first time. Some people know that they are going to go into federal government, for example, or work on federal issues like immigration, where you're required to just be licensed in any state, and your career is going to unfold in federal courts anyway. Federal courts, you know, they just require that you're in good standing in any state. So I know lots of immigration attorneys who they don't take the hardest exams out there. You can take it in any state, get licensed, and then use that to get admitted to practice before the federal courts. So these are all individual sorts of decisions that you'll need to make, and I can talk with you about that. In terms of the bar exam itself, how it varies from state to state, many of the states have decided to have this uniform test, like one whole day is a multiple choice day. It's the same test essentially across the board that everyone's taking. And then the essay portion will be based on local law, on state law. But it's going to cover those core courses that I told you about, those first year courses, like criminal law, constitutional law, torts, those classes. So you can know ahead going into it what will be tested, and you can definitely do a little research and shop around. Some bar exams cost $150, other ones cost $1,500. So there's a lot of factors that can go into making that decision, and it is a very big decision. And that's a really good question. Any other questions?
Nothing in the queue at the moment.
Okay, well, we're at time now. It's 1 o'clock. I just want to thank everyone for attending today's program. I hope that you found this helpful. It will be recorded and available online at the Career Center's YouTube channel. I look forward to meeting with you one-on-one to discuss your questions and your path to law school or to an alternative career. So I look forward to doing that. And again, just a reminder to go to Handshake, and you'll be able to find a slot to meet with me. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thank you for being part of the program. Bye.